Imagine a country that, you know, boasts some of the smartest, healthiest, longest living people on the planet.
Right.
A completely futuristic, high-tech knowledge economy. The cities are pristine, the air is clean, and the wealth just seems practically boundless.
Yeah, a real utopia on paper.
Exactly. But if you look under the hood, I mean, if you peel back the layers of this multi-trillion-dollar society,
Yeah.
you find a pretty startling reality.
You really do.
The entire magnificent structure is being heavily structurally funded by, well, digging up dirt and selling it.
Yep.
So today we are looking at the ultimate economic paradox. We're looking at a 21st century knowledge society built firmly on top of a 19th century extraction engine.
It's a profound contradiction. And honestly, it's entirely invisible if you just look at a standard map.
Right, because a map just gives you borders, capital cities, major rivers.
Exactly. It gives you the illusion of understanding a place. But to actually understand how a modern nation survives, how it pays its bills and handles its aging population, you have to look past the geography.
You have to look at the data.
You have to look at the macroeconomic and demographic data, yeah.
Which is exactly what we are doing today. Welcome to the Deep Dive.
Glad to be here.
For you, the listener, today's mission is essentially a masterclass in how a modern nation actually evolves over a 60-year time span.
It really is a massive timeline to cover.
It is. We're going to shortcut the reading for you and look directly at the X-ray of an entire country.
We got our hands on a dense, incredibly revealing 15-slide empirical data presentation.
Yeah, the title is A Mouthful Multidimensional Data Portrait of Australia's Socioeconomic Development and Sustainable Transition.
Right, but what it actually does is map out the country's struggle for sustainable transition.
We are talking about millions of data points here. Wealth generation, massive population shifts, the explosion of higher education.
Not to mention the hidden costs of environmental impact and the invisible architecture of national governance.
That's a lot.
It is a lot. But what makes this specific presentation so compelling is that it forces us to reconcile competing realities.
Like what?
Well, you have world-class human development, right? Peak education, peak health, peak institutional stability.
Yeah.
But that is running parallel to massive natural resource depletion and, frankly, deep structural vulnerabilities in the labor market.
So the data doesn't just tell us what happened.
No, if we analyze it correctly, it tells us how a nation physically and socially engineers its own prosperity.
And what that prosperity ultimately costs.
Exactly.
Okay, let's unpack this, because when you talk about engineering prosperity, the logical starting point has to be the money.
Always follow the money first.
Right. Before we can understand the people, the health crises, or the environmental footprint, we really need to understand the economic engine that built the landscape.
For sure.
I'm looking at the long-term macroeconomic trajectory in this deck, and the sheer consistency of the growth is hard to wrap my head around.
It's staggering.
We are looking at their gross domestic product, their GDP, and it's calculated in constant 2015 US dollars.
And that detail about constant 2015 US dollars is critical for anyone trying to read macroeconomic charts.
Why is that so important?
Because when you look at raw GDP over 60 years, a massive portion of that upward curve is just inflation.
Oh, right.
Yeah, it is just the currency losing value over time. So by locking the data to constant 2015 dollars, the researchers strip away the noise of inflation entirely.
That makes a lot of sense.
What you are left with is the absolute real growth in actual productivity and value creation. And for Australia, that line climbs steadily, almost relentlessly, to over $1.6 trillion.
Over $1.6 trillion in real inflation-adjusted value.
Yep.
And looking at the visual representation on the second slide, it's not a volatile roller coaster at all.
Very smooth.
It's this deep blue area chart marching aggressively upward. There are these tiny red dotted circles on the data, highlighting what the researchers call cyclical bumps.
Right. A slight economic softening here, a global recession there.
But they look like mere speed bumps on an otherwise completely clear highway. The long-term trend line is essentially an unbroken arrow pointing up and to the right.
And that level of historical resilience is really rare among developed nations.
I mean, you'd expect to see some huge drops.
Exactly. Many Western economies show massive, jagged interruptions during events like the 2008 financial crisis.
Or the shifting trade wars of the late 20th century.
Right. But Australia's data shows a system that absorbs those shocks incredibly well. And furthermore, it isn't just national bulk wealth.
The researchers also track gross national income, right?
Yes. GNI per capita, which has seen corresponding massive
Let
leaps.
me stop you there, because the distinction between GDP and GNI per capita often gets blurred.
It does all the time.
If GDP is 1.6 trillion, isn't the wealth of the population automatically going up?
Yeah.
Why does the presentation specifically highlight both metrics?
It is a really crucial distinction. See, GDP measures the total value of everything produced within the country's borders, regardless of who owns the factories or the mines. So if a foreign megacorporation extracts billions of dollars of iron ore and ships all the profits overseas, that still boosts Australia's GDP.
Oh, wow. Okay.
But gross national income, GNI, measures the income actually retained by the residents of the country.
Including income from overseas investment.
Yes, minus the profits sent out by foreign entities. So when you see GNI per capita rising in tandem with GDP, it tells you something very specific.
That the wealth isn't just a mirage of foreign extraction.
Spot on.
Hmm.
It is translating into deep, actual accumulation of wealth for the everyday population.
So the people themselves are genuinely getting richer, not just the multinational corporations operating on their soil.
Right.
That makes sense. But, the total bulk of the economy is only half the story.
It's the structure that's really interesting.
Yeah, exactly. As I dig into the next slide on industrial composition, the really jarring narrative is how they are generating that $1.6 trillion today compared to 60 years ago.
It is a complete structural flip.
Manufacturing used to be the bedrock of so many developed nations.
Yeah.
The reliable provider of middle-class jobs.
Yeah, absolutely.
But here it plummeted. It fell from representing over 13% of the Australian GDP down to around 5%.
And 5% is a remarkably small manufacturing base for a major, geographically isolated developed nation.
Right, they are basically an island continent.
Exactly. To understand the gravity of that drop, you have to look at what replaced it. The data shows the service sector didn't just grow organically alongside the rest of the economy.
It practically cannibalized it.
It did. The service sector expanded past the 60% mark and now sits at over 66% of the total GDP.
So they stopped making shoes, televisions, and cars, and they started selling, what, financial derivatives?
Financial services, specialized healthcare, IT consulting, and international university degrees.
Wow.
In economics, this phenomenon is called economic softening or deindustrialization.
Economic soft.
Right. And it is vital to understand the mechanics of why a developed nation sheds its factories and pivots so hard to intangible services.
Why does it happen?
It basically comes down to human capital and global wage arbitrage.
Okay, unpack that a bit.
Well, as a nation's workforce becomes more educated and their standard of living rises, their labor naturally becomes too expensive to competitively manufacture basic physical goods on a global scale.
Because you can't pay a worker $30 an hour to sew a T-shirt when a factory half a world away pays $3 a day.
Exactly. The math just doesn't work anymore.
I want to explore the reality of that transition, though.
Yeah.
Because it's easy to look at a chart and say, yes, deindustrialization.
It's just a line on a graph to most people.
Right. But let's try an analogy. Think about a classic tech company that started out 20 years ago selling physical hardware.
Okay.
Servers, hard drives, actual metal boxes.
Sure.
Over time, they realized the margins on metal boxes were getting impossibly thin, and global competition was fierce.
So they pivot.
They completely pivot. They shed their manufacturing plants and moved to a cloud-based software-as-a-service subscription model.
The classic sauce pivot.
Right. They still sell a few highly specialized metal boxes, but 66% of their revenue is now invisible. It's in the cloud. That is essentially the Australian economy.
That parallel captures the economic shift perfectly. They moved from a hardware model to a software model.
Yeah.
However, there is a fundamental difference between a corporation pivoting and a sovereign nation pivoting.
Which is?
A tech company can simply fire its warehouse staff, close its factories, and hire a bunch of software engineers. A country cannot fire its citizens.
Oh, right. You can't just delete the working class.
Exactly.
When a country pivots to a software-as-a-service economy, you are leaving behind an entire generation of workers who spent 30 years tightening bolts and running assembly lines.
Yep.
You are asking a 50-year-old auto worker to suddenly become a financial compliance analyst or a specialized elder care nurse. That human toll is massive.
The societal friction generated by that transition is immense, and it requires a monumental public policy response to prevent massive structural unemployment.
They have to completely retrain the
You
population.
have to completely overhaul your education system, which we will see clearly in the later data.
Right.
But beyond the domestic human cost, This pivot to services introduces a fascinating structural vulnerability on the global stage.
Vulnerability is exactly the word that comes to mind when I look at the trade integration data on slide 13.
The integration is very deep.
The presentation highlights that the sum of imports and exports as a percentage of the total GDP jumped from roughly 26% historically to nearly 47% today.
It almost doubled.
So almost half of their entire economic footprint is now entangled with the rest of the world.
Well, a service-heavy economy cannot exist in isolation. The concept here is comparative advantage. By hyper-specializing in what you are globally best at high-end services, and in Australia's specific case, raw resource extraction, you maximize your wealth during times of peace and global stability.
You accept that you will trade your intellectual capital and your raw earth to other nations.
Right, in exchange for the manufactured goods, the phones, the cars, the medical equipment that you no longer make yourself.
But doesn't that require a terrifying level of faith in the stability of the global system?
Oh, absolutely.
If manufacturing is only 5% of your entire economy, what happens to your self-reliance during a massive global shock?
That's the billion-dollar question.
Say a multi-year pandemic that locks down borders, or a massive geopolitical conflict that severs major shipping lanes in the Pacific.
Yeah.
If cargo ships stop coming, a nation with a 5% manufacturing base doesn't have the factories to make its own basic goods, let alone the specialized components needed to keep a high-tech society running.
You are identifying the ultimate trade-off of the modern globalized state.
It seems so risky.
Deindustrialization means sacrificing autarky, which is absolute economic self-sufficiency in exchange for profound prosperity.
It is a calculated high-stakes gamble that the global supply chain will essentially hold.
It is. And the rising GNI per capita we discussed earlier is the financial reward for taking on that risk.
Right.
Interestingly, the data does show a silver lining within that tiny manufacturing base they do have left.
Oh, what is it?
High-tech exports as a proportion of manufactured goods are steadily rising.
Okay, so what little they do make physically isn't basic consumer goods.
No, it's highly advanced, highly specialized equipment, maybe mining robotics or advanced medical devices.
But wait, this brings up a glaring question for me.
Go for it.
If they aren't making physical things at scale anymore, but their trade integration is nearly 47%, what exactly are they trading? I know they export mountains of iron ore and coal, but the data says the domestic engine, the thing employing everyone and driving 66% of the GDP, is services. Are they just trading knowledge?
Well, the physical volume of resource exports is astronomically huge, and that balances the national trade deficit, effectively paying for all the imported manufactured goods.
Okay, the dirt pays the bill.
Right. But the domestic engine, the daily reality for the vast majority of the population, is indeed fueled by services. And here is the crucial connection.
I'm listening.
To run a massive service economy, to be that software as a service nation, you need a fundamentally different type of raw material.
You no longer need assembly line labor.
Exactly. You need an aggressively upgraded human workforce.
So if we aren't manufacturing physical goods anymore, our primary export becomes brain power.
Precisely.
But you can't just snap your fingers and create a knowledge economy overnight. What did the data say about how Australia actually built that intellectual pipeline?
The transformation of their educational infrastructure over the last few decades has been explosive.
What are the numbers looking like?
The data indicates that currently, over 30% of the population aged 25 and older holds at least a bachelor's degree or its equivalent.
Over 30%.
Yeah.
30% of the adult population holding advanced degrees. That is a staggering density of human capital.
What's fascinating here is that the aggregate number alone is impressive, but the demographic breakdown of who actually holds those degrees reveals a seismic societal shift.
How so?
The data explicitly shows that women's educational attainment hasn't just grown, it has surged past men's.
Really?
Yes, women are now the undisputed main drivers of premium human capital in the country.
I want to paint a mental picture for everyone listening right now. In the presentation, the researchers use a visual called a dumbbell plot to track this.
It's a very striking visual.
It compares the initial historical data for bachelor's degrees with the modern data, splitting the progress by gender.
Right.
In the early years, the dot representing men is way ahead of the dot representing women.
As you would expect from historical norms.
Right. Men had significantly higher degree rates, which was unfortunately standard for the mid-20th century across most developed nations.
Right.
But as you track the lines forward in time, There is this exact, undeniable historical crossover point. The female line doesn't just casually catch up, it violently overtakes the male line.
It really accelerates past it.
Women didn't just close the educational gap, they became the entirely new baseline for advanced high-level education.
And identifying that crossover point is critical because it represents a structural rewiring of a nation's intellectual capacity.
The brains of the operation literally changed.
Exactly. When the pipeline of premium talent flips demographics, the downstream effects on innovation are profound. And we see those downstream effects clearly in the knowledge output metrics.
Oh, the slide on research and innovation is wild.
It is. The scientific and technical output in Australia has essentially gone exponential.
We are talking about annual scientific and technical journal articles rocketing from roughly 20,000 to over 60,000.
It's a massive leap.
It's this aggressive, almost vertical staircase of intellectual output on the chart.
And it's not just academic papers either. The data on intellectual property attraction is equally vital.
You mean trademarks and patents?
Yeah. Non-resident trademark applications, meaning foreign entities registering their IP in Australia, broke the 60,000 mark.
Over 60,000 foreign trademarks.
And that metric is a powerful indicator. It tells us that the global market views Australia as a highly desirable, highly secure place to park and protect intellectual property.
But hold on, you can't just have a bunch of smart people with degrees and expect a secure, thriving global market to magically appear.
No, you certainly cannot.
I mean, innovation doesn't happen in a vacuum. A foreign tech giant isn't going to register its cutting-edge patents in a country just because they have a lot of university graduates.
Right. There has to be a framework.
Exactly.
And that framework is exactly what the researchers capture in the section labeled Governance on slide 14.
Okay.
This is the invisible architecture we mentioned earlier. The presentation utilizes the Worldwide Governance Indicators, or WGI, which are incredibly comprehensive metrics.
What do they measure?
Things like regulatory quality, political stability, that sort of thing. And the data points for Australia consistently sit in the 90th to 100th percentiles globally for critical categories.
Like what?
Like rule of law, control of corruption, and government effectiveness.
Top 10% of the planet, consistently.
Every single year.
So help me connect the dots here. How does a 90th percentile ranking in rule of law actually translate into a 66% service economy and 60,000 trademark applications? Walk me through that mechanism.
Think about it from the perspective of a global CEO.
Okay.
You're deciding where to build a $500 million research and development facility. You don't just look at who has smart engineers. You look at risk.
Risk mitigation is everything.
If you build that lab in a country with weak governance, a corrupt local official might demand bribes just to keep your electricity on.
Or worse, a local competitor might steal your quantum computing patents.
Exactly. And the local court system, lacking a strong rule of law, will refuse to protect you. The transaction costs of doing business in a corrupt system are ruinously high.
So governance is literally an insurance policy.
It is the ultimate insurance policy.
Just as roads, bridges, and deep-water ports allowed a manufacturing economy to move physical goods efficiently.
Right.
High-quality governance is the infrastructure that allows a knowledge economy to move ideas efficiently.
Spot on. It enforces contracts, lowers transaction costs, and makes intellectual innovation safe.
It is the bedrock of the software economy.
You cannot run a complex, intangible service sector without absolute trust in the legal and institutional framework. So you have this triad.
Triad being what?
World-class governance providing the secure environment, an incredibly high density of university degrees providing the raw brain power, and an economy structured to reward high-value services.
And as we established, the data tells us that women are the ultimate powerhouse of this new knowledge economy.
The numbers don't lie. They hold the premium human capital.
Which leads to some intense speculation. If we extrapolate this out over the next 2 or 3 decades, how does this sudden, undeniable female dominance in higher education reshape corporate leadership?
Or political power, or the entire social dynamic of the country.
Exactly. If the knowledge economy relies on the best brains, and the data says the most credentialed brains are increasingly women's, you would expect the C-suites, the legislative bodies, and the upper echelons of wealth to completely reflect that shift.
That would be the logical assumption, yes.
If the labor market functioned as a perfect meritocracy based purely on educational attainment.
Right. The pipeline of talent dictates that female leadership should inevitably become the dominant force in navigating this service economy.
Okay, but this is exactly where I have to push back hard.
Uh-oh. Here we go.
Because I am looking at the next section of the data, the demographics and labor market breakdown, and it completely contradicts that assumption.
It really does.
It highlights a massive glaring paradox. If women hold the educational advantage, if they are the engine of the knowledge economy, why does the labor market data look so incredibly strange for them?
You are hitting on the core tension of the entire socioeconomic model.
I mean, the numbers are wild.
When you look at how this highly educated workforce is actually deployed in reality, you uncover a deep structural distortion.
Oh,
And to understand that distortion, you have to look at the shape of the population itself. We are seeing a demographic phenomenon known as the inverted pyramid.
let me lay out the facts as I'm seeing them on slide 5, because the disconnect is jarring. We just established women dominate higher education.
Yes.
Yet, out of a total labor force of over 14 million people, the data shows that between 41 and 46% of employed women are working part-time.
Nearly half.
Nearly half of the female workforce is sidelined from full-time professional acceleration. And you're saying the cause of this is the inverted pyramid.
Yes.
Walk me through the aging data.
The age structure of the country is literally turning upside down. The 65 and older demographic has nearly doubled over the studied period.
Doubled.
It surged from around 8.5% of the population historically to over 16% today. The trend line for the elderly is pointing aggressively upward.
And the younger demographics.
Conversely, the 0 to 14 youth bracket is shrinking, dropping down to around 19%.
So you have a booming elderly population and a shrinking youth population.
Exactly. The base of the pyramid, the young people who will eventually become workers, is narrowing.
While the top of the pyramid, the retirees, is getting massive and heavy. But why is the elderly population booming so aggressively?
Well, the irony is that this booming elderly population is actually the result of a spectacular triumph by the Australian state.
What do you mean?
Their healthcare system resource allocation is phenomenal. Over the time frame of the data, medical density jumped from 1.1 doctors per 1,000 people to over 4 doctors per 1,000.
That's a nearly 4-fold increase in medical professional density.
And the results of that investment are undeniable. The health indicators are exceptional across the board.
Like maternal mortality.
Maternal mortality sits at an incredibly low 2 to 6 per 100,000 live births. Infant and under 5 mortality have practically crashed to 0 compared to historical baselines.
And life expectancy.
It is among the highest in the world. They have effectively conquered early preventable death.
So what does this all mean? They're almost too good at keeping people alive.
You could say that.
But when a population lives consistently into their 80s and 90s, you trade one set of medical problems for another.
You trade acute problems for chronic ones.
The data on slide 9 shows a massive shift in the type of threats facing the population. We are talking about non-communicable diseases, or NCDs.
Right. Cardiovascular disease, cancer, diabetes, chronic respiratory issues.
The shift in disease burden is profound.
The probability of dying between the ages of 30 and 70 from these specific diseases is down to about 9%, which is a huge medical victory in terms of survivability.
9% is incredibly low.
It is. However, the sheer prevalence of these chronic diseases remains exceptionally high in the older demographics. Diabetes and obesity in particular require continuous, decades-long management.
So the medical system ensures you survive the heart attack at 65.
Yes,
But then you live with chronic heart failure and diabetes until you are 85.
exactly.
That means 20 years of requiring constant medical monitoring, assistance with daily living, and mobility support.
People are surviving, but they are surviving in a state that requires intense long-term care.
Which brings us right back to my question about the massive rate of female part-time work.
Exactly. This is where the demographic data and the labor data violently intersect.
It's all connected.
You have a booming, long-living, elderly population requiring chronic care. You still have a youth population that needs raising. Who is doing the actual physical labor of providing that care? The massive rate of female part-time work highlights a hidden parallel economy. It is the unpaid care burden.
The unpaid care burden.
Women are highly educated. They hold the premium intellectual capital required for the global service economy, yet society structurally forces them to absorb the vast majority of the unpaid care work for both the shrinking youth and the booming elderly populations.
Let me make sure I'm understanding the sheer scale of this invisible subsidy.
It's massive.
If the state had to pay market rates for every hour of elder care currently being provided for free by a daughter who cut her hours at the law firm to part-time.
The tax rate required to fund that would probably bankrupt the economy.
Wow. So the state's incredible healthcare triumph, keeping everyone alive for decades, is functionally being subsidized by the suppressed wages and part-time status of the most highly educated female generation in the nation's history.
That is the stark macroeconomic reality. It is a colossal misallocation of premium human capital,
It's totally backwards.
and it creates a terrifying scenario regarding the demographic dividend.
Explain the demographic dividend for me.
The demographic dividend is the golden period in a nation's history when it has a massive working age population relative to its dependent population, kids and retirees.
Okay.
During that window, economic growth is relatively easy because you have plenty of workers paying taxes to support a small number of dependents.
But the inverted pyramid means that window is slamming shut.
It is rapidly closing.
You have fewer and fewer working-age people being taxed heavily to support a massive, long-living, medically expensive aging population.
And if half of your best educated workers are stuck working part-time to provide unpaid care, your tax base is artificially suppressed just when you need it most.
Think about your own life for a second, you listening right now.
It's a very relatable scenario.
If you live in Europe, North America, or East Asia, you are likely staring down this exact same barrel.
Most developed nations are.
If you are part of this hyper-educated generation, you play by the rules, you got the degrees, you have the specialized skills for the global knowledge economy, but society structurally requires you to handicap your career.
To step back from the C-suite or the research lab.
Because the elder care system is overwhelmed and
Yeah.
someone has to take care of your aging parents. How does that alter your life trajectory?
Drastically.
And multiply that by millions of people. How does that impact a nation's total economic output? It's not a choice. It's a systemic necessity forced by demographics.
This demographic reality forces profound policy questions. If non-communicable diseases like diabetes are the main threat diseases highly correlated with lifestyle, urban design, and diet, how will public policy have to evolve?
They can't just keep building more hospitals.
The current model of treating sickness in acute hospital settings is financially unsustainable. They will likely have to pivot to a model of enforcing wellness at the community level.
So they have to design cities and food systems that prevent the diabetes in the first place, before it requires 20 years of part-time care from a daughter who should be running an IT consulting firm.
Precisely. The social and economic cost of chronic aging is the great looming challenge of their domestic service economy. But sustaining this high-tech, healthy, highly governed society is incredibly expensive in pure, raw monetary terms.
Oh, absolutely.
Hmm.
The universities, the hospitals, the clean cities, they all require massive funding.
So where does the ultimate financial fuel for this entire utopia come from?
It comes from the earth.
Yes.
And this is where the data takes a dark, sobering turn.
Mm.
We talked about how Australia is a 66% service economy domestically, a pristine software-as-a-service nation.
Right.
But on the global stage, they're still a massive, unapologetic resource exporter. We are looking at the environmental reckoning on slide 10, the actual cost of all this wealth.
To grasp the cost, we have to look at a very specific metric the researchers used called adjusted net savings.
How is that different from regular GDP?
Traditional GDP just looks at how much money a country makes. If you chop down an entire ancient forest and sell the timber, your GDP goes up.
Because money changed hands.
Exactly. But adjusted net savings is a more honest accounting method. It requires you to deduct the value of what you had to destroy or deplete to get that money. In Australia's case, the data demands massive, continuous deductions for natural resource depletion, specifically the depletion of finite minerals and fossil fuels.
They are essentially selling off the furniture to pay the mortgage.
That's one way to put it.
The national wealth accumulation, the GNI per capita leaps we marveled at earlier, are brilliant, but they are accompanied by the permanent, irreversible loss of natural capital.
Once you dig up a ton of iron ore or coal and ship it away, it is gone forever.
And the byproduct of operating that extraction engine is punishingly high. The data shows total CO2 emissions, excluding land use, are hovering near 400 megatons.
400 mount CO2.
For a population of their size, that is a staggering, massive carbon footprint.
It is one of the highest per capita carbon footprints in the developed world.
Wow.
However, the presentation doesn't just show a static picture of pollution. It captures the beginnings of a structural reaction.
You mean the energy mix data on slide 11?
Let's look at the energy mix data, specifically non-hydro renewable energy generation. For decades, this metric flatlined below 1%.
It was essentially a non-factor in their power grid.
But suddenly, in the most recent data points, it has violently spiked, bursting through the 20% mark.
I'm looking at the chart on this, and it is wild. It's just a dead, flat line running along the bottom axis for years, a long, complacent slumber, and then suddenly a steep, aggressive vertical leap.
A massive jump.
The renewables finally woke up. What caused that sudden snap?
That aggressive spike is the result of a long-delayed collision between climate policy urgency and the sudden plunging economic cost of renewable technology like solar and wind.
The tech finally got cheap enough.
Yes. It represents a desperate, necessary attempt to break their profound path dependency on fossil fuels.
Okay.
But if we connect this to the bigger picture, this brings us to perhaps the most fascinating paradox in the entire data set.
The contrast between their global environmental footprint and their local environmental reality.
Yes.
This part absolutely blew my mind. We just established they are emitting massive amounts of CO2, 400 megatons, driven by heavy resource extraction. But when you look at the livability data for their cities, where the vast majority of the population actually resides, the local air quality is world-class.
It's pristine.
The PM 2.5 exposure, that's the fine particulate matter from exhaust and industry that gets deep into your lungs and causes chronic respiratory disease, is pristine.
It sits steadily at 7 to 9 micrograms per cubic meter.
To put that in context, that is well below the World Health Organization's danger threshold.
It is exceptionally clean air for a highly urbanized, advanced economy.
So help me reconcile this. They're running a massive 19th century extraction engine, digging up millions of tons of carbon-heavy resources. But locally, their air is cleaner than almost anywhere else on Earth.
It's a huge disconnect.
Are they essentially just digging up the dirty stuff and exporting the pollution to other countries to burn? I want to be careful here and stick strictly to the data points provided.
Sure.
We have incredibly high global CO2 output versus incredibly low local PM 2.5, but it forces you to ask a tough analytical question. Can a nation legitimately claim to balance its strict global climate commitments while its core sovereign wealth fundamentally relies on extracting and exporting finite, carbon-heavy natural capital?
It is the defining existential tension of their entire macroeconomic model.
It's a tightrope walk.
The clean local air is a testament to the high-quality governance we discussed earlier, strict domestic environmental regulations, excellent zoning, and urban management.
Right.
But the national budget, the money that pays for the regulators who keep the local air clean, relies heavily on selling carbon and minerals to the global market.
They're attempting a high-wire act.
They're trying to rapidly decarbonize their own domestic grid, hence the spike to 20% renewables, while simultaneously funding their society by exporting the old economy.
You cannot easily decouple a century of massive mining infrastructure from your national budget overnight, no matter how fast you build domestic solar panels.
No, you can't, which perfectly sets up the final synthesizing slide of this entire presentation.
Slide 15.
The researchers took all of these competing paradoxical threads, the wealth, the aging, the education, the carbon, and plotted them onto a 2x2 strategic matrix.
They map the country's development stage against policy urgency.
It is a brilliant way to distill 60 years of data into a roadmap for the future. Let's walk through the quadrants.
Lead the way.
First, you have the strategy of advantage consolidation. These are the foundational elements that Australia must protect at all costs, their core trinity.
High-quality governance, premium human capital, and the excellent medical system.
Yes, those are the load-bearing pillars of the service economy. If the rule of law slips and corruption creeps in, or if the universities degrade, the entire software-as-a-service economic model collapses because foreign capital will flee.
Right. You lose the trust, you lose the 60,000 trademark applications.
Exactly. The second quadrant is structural transformation. This is the mandate to use research and development to push the service sector and their high-tech exports further up the global value chain.
The logic here seems to be if you are only going to manufacture 5% of your economy, the 5% better be quantum computing components, specialized mining robotics, and advanced biotech devices.
You cannot compete on basic commodities anymore. The transformation from an extraction economy to a pure innovation economy is the ultimate goal.
What's the next quadrant?
The most critical part of the matrix, the area that determines if the nation succeeds or stalls, is the urgent quadrant, the core challenges.
Okay, lay them out.
Number 1, solving the fiscal and labor supply nightmare of an irreversibly aging population.
The inverted pyramid.
Yes. Number two, accelerating green decarbonization to resolve the intense, undeniable conflict between relying on natural resource exports and meeting global climate survival goals.
I want you to imagine holding these variables in your hands right now. In your left hand, you have an aging population demanding more and more expensive, decades-long chronic healthcare. In your right hand, you have a planet demanding less carbon extraction, threatening the very export revenue you use to pay for that healthcare. How do you pay for the first without doing the second?
The past 60 years for this nation were about pure, relentless growth. The next 60 years have to be about a terrifyingly delicate balance.
That is the crux of the entire deep dive. It is a race against demographic time.
How will they fill the labor gap created by the shrinking youth population and the booming elderly population?
Well, the data implies two extreme structural solutions.
First, they will need massive, unprecedented technological automation in the service sector, AI doing the analytical work of millions to boost productivity without needing more humans.
Whoa.
Or they will have to fundamentally restructure how women's labor and unpaid care are valued in society. They might need massive state intervention and subsidies for elder care to free up that premium female human capital, allowing them to shift from part-time caregiving back into full-time innovation.
They have to get those highly educated women out of the invisible, unpaid care economy and into the visible, high-value innovation economy. Or the math of the inverted pyramid just doesn't work long-term.
And they have to execute this massive social restructuring while weaning their national budget off the finite resources that built their wealth in the first place.
It is a profound portrait of a nation standing at the crossroads of its own spectacular success.
They solved the problems of the 20th century, creating wealth, educating the populace, curing early mortality so well that they birthed the ultimate 21st century dilemmas.
Okay, let's step back and look at the whole picture. We have gone on an incredible multidimensional journey through the data today.
We covered a lot of ground.
We started with a macroeconomic boom, watching an entire nation systematically shed its factories to become a high-end service provider.
We saw the rise of a hyper-educated female-led knowledge economy governed by world-class institutional rules.
But then we immediately hit the invisible demographic wall of an aging population and uncovered the massive gendered burden of unpaid care that secretly subsidizes the state.
Finally, we faced the environmental accounting, the irreversible toll of how that utopian national wealth is actually generated from the earth.
It proves that when you look past the map and examine the X-ray, the simplistic narratives of national success fall away, revealing a complex, fragile ecosystem of trade-offs.
It really does.
And here is the most important takeaway for you, listening to this. This isn't just a story about one country in the Southern Hemisphere.
No, not at all.
This multidimensional data portrait is a crystal ball for almost every developed nation on Earth right now. Whether you are in Europe, North America, or East Asia, you are likely living in an economy facing this exact same collision.
An inverted demographic pyramid demanding endless care, a service economy desperate for high-level talent, and a global climate transition demanding an immediate end to the old, reliable ways of making money.
We are all staring at this same blueprint, trying to figure out how to balance the equations.
This raises an important question to leave you pondering. If this incredible national wealth, the world-class healthcare, the exponential university growth, and the pristine local air quality were largely funded over decades by the relentless depletion of finite global resources,
Yeah.
can a country maintain a first-world utopian lifestyle once the digging finally, inevitably, has to stop?
Can a modern service economy truly sustain itself entirely on its own knowledge, its own software, and its intangible ideas?
Or is it always fundamentally secretly tethered to the physical earth?
When you look past the geography and you look at the X-ray of the nation, you have to wonder what happens when the bones run out of calcium. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Look around your own city today, look at your own economy, and see if you can spot the invisible infrastructure holding it all together.